house for a pittance. A small cottage on the outskirts of the Andalusian village of Bélmez de la Moraleda seemed like the perfect escape from the noise of Madrid. Mateo was a professional restorer and photographer. He saw beauty even in the cracks of old plaster, but this building had a peculiar texture. The air inside always smelled of damp lime, and the floor was unnaturally cold, even in the August heat.
It's just old concrete, Mateo.
Elena laughed when he first noticed a strange stain in the kitchen.
Moisture must be seeping through the foundation.
The stain resembled a woman's face. Frozen in a silent scream, Mateo tried to scrub it away with acid, but the next morning, the image was clearer. Now he could see details: empty sockets, disheveled hair, and a deep furrow on the forehead. The face wasn't painted. It seemed to emerge from within the concrete structure itself, forming from microscopic crystals of salt and dust. A week later, there were 5 faces on the floor. They appeared chaotically: by the stove, under the table, in the corner near the door. It was a gallery of pain. Mateo began to notice that each new face bore a disturbing resemblance to villagers who had gone missing over the last half-century. But the worst began with Mateo himself. First, he felt a heaviness in his legs. His gait became slow, and his joints made a dry, stony sound with every movement. His skin, once tanned and supple, turned dry and gray. When he combed his hair, a fine white dust, like cement mix, showered onto the floor.
"Elena, I'm cold,"
he whispered at night, but his voice no longer sounded human. It was the friction of 2 stone slabs grinding together. One morning he woke up and couldn't open his eyelids. When Elena helped him wash, she recoiled in horror. The skin on Mateo's face had hardened. Pores vanished, replaced by a smooth, porous texture. His sweat now smelled of raw concrete and slaked lime.
Mateo, we're going to the hospital. Now.
Elena screamed, but Mateo only pointed a trembling gray hand at the kitchen floor. There, directly under his favorite chair, a new face had appeared. It was so detailed it seemed 3-dimensional. It was Mateo's face. Every mole, every curve of his lips, all recreated with terrifying precision. But the eyes on the floor were alive. They blinked. Mateo felt his own consciousness beginning to leak downward. He saw the world simultaneously from his own eyes and the eyes on the floor. His physical body was becoming an empty shell, a stone cocoon in which his soul was suffocating.
"It wants an exchange,"
Mateo gasped. His tongue had become hard as a pebble. He collapsed to the floor, no longer able to hold his own weight. Elena tried to lift him, but Mateo weighed a ton. He was as if cast from monolithic concrete. When her tears fell on his gray cheek, they didn't roll down. They were instantly absorbed into the skin, leaving only dark spots, like on dry pavement. That night, the house in Bélmez came alive. Elena heard the walls whispering with 1,000 voices. The kitchen floor vibrated. The faces on the concrete began to move, flowing into one another. Mateo lay motionless in the center of the room, his clothes fused with his body, turning into a single gray mass. He no longer breathed with lungs. His breath now occurred through the cracks in the house's foundation.
"Elena, run,"
was the last sound his stone lips made before they finally fused shut. At dawn, Elena entered the kitchen with a bucket of mortar. She had gone mad with grief and horror. She decided to pour a new layer of cement over this cursed place, to bury the faces forever. She worked for hours, leveling the thick gray mass with a trowel. She covered everything, the floor, the corners, and even the motionless figure of Mateo, which was now just a strange protrusion in the center of the room. When the work was finished, silence fell over the house. Elena sat on the threshold, wiping sweat from her brow. But an hour later, the fresh concrete began to stir. On the perfectly level surface she had just made, contours began to emerge. Thousands of tiny hands began to press upward against the thin layer of mortar. And in the very center, where Mateo lay, his face appeared. It was enormous, spanning the entire room. His mouth opened, and instead of a scream, a black, oily liquid began to pour out. The memory of all those who had been entombed under this house for centuries. Elena felt her own feet beginning to sink into the hardening concrete. She tried to jump out, but her legs were as if glued. She looked down and saw the skin on her ankles turning gray, covered in tiny pores. 10 years passed. The house in Bélmez became a pilgrimage site for paranormal researchers. Tourists walked inside, marveling at the strange patterns on the floor. "Look," the guide said, pointing to two figures that seemed to be embracing, frozen in the very center of the kitchen.
"This is the most beautiful part of the exhibit. We call them the concrete lovers."
They say these faces cannot be erased. We even tried grinding machines, but the deeper we dig, the clearer their eyes become. The tourists took photos, not noticing that the floor beneath their feet was becoming soft. They didn't hear how deep under the foundation, in the darkness where bones and lime mix, thousands of voices plead for only one thing: for someone else to become part of this endless gallery. When the last tourist left, closing the door, Mateo's face on the floor slowly turned its pupils toward Elena's face, frozen beside him. A drop of water rolled from the glass eyes on the concrete. But it wasn't a tear. It was condensate, smelling of salt, stone, and eternal regret.